I think many of us are desensitized to like just how abhorrent, evil, unjust the act of abortion is. And I think partly that's because we don't have a full enough appreciation for the goodness of life. I don't think we have a profound enough respect for, the dignity of life properly understood. I mean, there are philosophical arguments you can make. I think the strongest argument anyone can make is that we're all made in the image and likeness of God, right? And so I think that theological argument, and if you recognize that every human being is made in God's very image and likeness, then the act of killing another human being without justification, right? Sometimes it's going to be necessary war, it's going to be necessary self-defense, et cetera, et cetera. But without, killing another innocent human being, it should be something that's really horrific. And I think we've been grossly desensitized to it.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Saurabh Sharma. I'm the president of American Moment, and I'm joined by
Nick Solheim, the COO of American Moment.
And we have another fantastic episode for you guys today. It is starting to not only be fall, but feel like fall, and we are continuing to truck along with fantastic episodes for you guys.
It's like 80 degrees outside.
I don't know. It was raining. I don't know. It's whatever. It's DC. Any time that's not 100 degrees, and I literally want to die when I walk outside, is fall. Today we had on one of the rare returning guests on Moment of Truth. I suspect this will start to be less and less the case as we eventually exhaust the limited pool of people that we actually like in Washington, D.C. and
but
just
for now, it's an
back
honor.
on. Yes. We had on today Ryan T. Anderson, who's the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, to talk all things social conservatism, but more concretely about his takes. Now, I suppose they're less hot because it's been a few weeks since the Dobbs decision came down, but still pleasantly warm takes about the Dobbs decision, and also some real kind of deep dives into what the incentives, the sociology, the psychology, the conservative movement, the pro-life movement, and the Republican Party are on this issue. Those are three separate things with three separate, very important incentive structures. We also got some much needed advice, or actually updates on a dog named Cow and a cow named Frog. I will not explain. You have to wait till the end.
You have to listen literally straight to the end.
You have to. It's always delightful. I thought we were going to wrap, and then we got into the farm stuff. I was like, this stuff's gold. You have to keep it. Yeah. It's always excellent. Ryan's bio is well known to all, but he's a PhD and the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. He's the co-author of 5 books, including the just released Tearing Us Apart: How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing. His research has been cited by 2 U.S. Supreme Court justices, Samuel Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas, the only good ones. And he received he received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Princeton, graduated Phi Beta Kappa and magna cum laude. He got his doctoral degree in political philosophy from the University of Notre Dame. His dissertation was titled Neither Liberal Nor Libertarian: A Natural Law Approach to Social Justice and Economic Rights. He's appeared all over the place in every news outlet and publication. He is the JP2 Teaching Fellow in the Social Thought at the University of Dallas, a member of the James Madison Society at Princeton, a fellow at the Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America, as well as the founding editor of Public Discourse, the online journal of the Witherspoon Institute of Princeton, New Jersey. For 9 years, he was the William E. Simon Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He has served as an adjunct professor of philosophy and political science at Christendom College, a visiting fellow at the Veritas Center at Franciscan University, and as the assistant editor of First Things. Follow him on Twitter for many farm updates at Ryan T. And Nick was having barn envy all weekend about
it's true.
It. You can see that and much more on his Twitter.
I think his barn is bigger than my house.
Entirely possible.
Yeah.
And you can follow everything else that he's doing at the Ethics and Public Policy Center's website at eppc.org. We highly recommend that you do so. And we'll go now to Ryan T. Anderson. Ryan, thank you for coming back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me again.
You are one of the select few people who has come back for a second taping, so thank you. This time, unfortunately, we weren't able to make the logistics work to come out to your neck of the woods, so you had to come to our much less interesting neck of the woods. I want to talk later about some of the various projects you've been doing on your farm, but first, I think the 10,000-foot elephant in the room is, especially as it relates to your work, is what's happened vis-a-vis the abortion issue in our country in the last 6 months to a year. Tell us the tale. What have you made of everything that's gone down in the last 6 months? And have you been vindicated? Have you been proven correct? Have your takes aged poorly? Tell us about it.
Sure. So, I mean, I don't know if I have any takes on the past 6 months that could be either falsified or vindicated. I think my basic evaluation of the past 6 months is that, unfortunately, we have one political party that is fundamentally committed to a fundamental form of injustice, and that they will do, more or less anything to try to protect that form of injustice. I think it's highly likely that the leak inside of the Supreme Court came from one of the left-leaning pro-abort clerks. This wasn't some 4D chess, move of trying to prevent, one of the conservatives from jumping off of the Alito opinion. Because as we later saw in the Politico reporting, there weren't any changes from, what was it, a February draft that was leaked or a January circulated draft that got leaked in February, whatever the timeline was. They said that, there hadn't been any changes in the internal voting. So I think it's highly likely that the leak itself came from someone trying to protect the abortion license. I think what we've seen since then were lots of pregnancy centers that were firebombed, that were graffitied, that were attacked in various ways. We've seen churches and other houses of worship that were attacked. We've seen an assassination attempt on a sitting Supreme Court justice. And then we saw DAs, the Department of Justice, do nothing about any of this. Unwilling to even throw a bone of a verbal condemnation. Biden has seemed virtually unconcerned about any of this. And then in terms of the talking points, pro-abortion activists on the left don't actually defend the position that they hold, which is unlimited abortion for any reason on the taxpayer's dime throughout all 9 months of pregnancy. All of a sudden, all we're talking about is miscarriage and ectopic pregnancy, and a fraction of the reasons why people might need medical care, which none of the pro-life laws actually prohibit, because the medical care that is, needed in those situations aren't elective abortions to begin with, right? And so it's a lot of, and then the last thing I'll add, and then we had a lot of talk about whether or not gay marriage and contraception were going to be the next Supreme Court rights that were taken away, right? Which to my mind suggests a lot of, kick up dust, throw stuff against the wall and see what stick. We want to talk about anything other than the actual view on abortion that we hold. All right, so that's what's happened on the left side of the aisle. On the right side of the aisle, it seems like no one actually wants to defend the position that they actually hold. There's just been a devastating lack of leadership, lack of use of the bully pulpit to celebrate the victory in Dobbs and to defend the fundamental right to life, to defend the goodness of life, to defend, even if all you can do is say it was constitutionally correctly decided, that's, thin gruel, but at least it's something. But even more importantly, you can say, and it's the first step towards a human rights movement, a social justice movement, however you want to phrase it. And it's been deafening, the silence, particularly from elected officials who have just been disinclined to speak on this, which has allowed, to my mind, the left largely to demagogue and to scaremonger on what the consequences of various pro-life laws would be.
So on the opinion itself, I think we've asked every guest that we've had on about this issue, this question, on a scale of 1 to 10 of, let's take, 1 and 10 still being reasonably possibilities. Where did the opinion rank for you in terms of where you would have liked it? If we're within the realm of reasonably possible, given the current 9 members of the court and given kind of the sociology of the American conservative legal movement, I think this was a 10, right? I would have loved it if the Robbie George, John Finnis amicus brief became the majority opinion. But as far as we know, no one, even the Thomas concurrence, Thomas used his concurrence to go after substantive due process rights rather than using his concurrence to embrace the Robbie George, John Finnis argument on 14th Amendment personhood. So I think within the realm of reasonably plausible, this was, everything we could have hoped for. Mm-hmm. I do take Hadley Arcus's point that there could have been, more that was said in the court's own voice about what abortion is. But as opposed to citations?
Yeah, it was more, if you look at how Alito frames this, it's more of, the state says this, the people who are, objecting to the state law say this, And then our position is that the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution does not protect a license to abortion. Mm-hmm. He's also, I think, very careful in how he phrases it, not to rule out the 14th Amendment personhood. I think Kavanaugh's concurrence very clearly indicates that he wants to rule that out. He wants to say that the Constitution is neutral on abortion. The Constitution doesn't take sides on the abortion debate. Kavanaugh's concurrence, if I remember correctly, is only signed by Kavanaugh. No one joins on to that concurrence. So again, I don't know. If I had to guess, I would think maybe Justice Thomas and Justice Alito have some sympathy for the 14th Amendment personhood opinion. Maybe Gorsuch. I think it's clear that Kavanaugh does not. Mm-hmm. I think it's clear that Chief Justice does not. I don't know where Justice Barrett would come down on it. I think so. Anyway, to answer your direct question, I think the opinion itself is really good for a variety of reasons. Both because it just states the truth about the past 50 years entirely being made from whole cloth. Mm-hmm. That there's nothing in the actual constitutional text, the history of the Constitution, the logic of the Constitution, the tradition of American constitutionalism that would justify a right to privacy understood as a right to engage in a commercial transaction where you kill another human being. Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, let's just think about how absurd the Roe logic was. That then gets transformed into Casey, where they say they uphold the central holding of Roe, but they don't do it because it was rightly decided. They do it on stare decisis grounds, and now all of a sudden it's a liberty interest that's being used. And again, like what sort of liberty interests protect a right to engage in an action that kills another human being? Right? It's a weird form of liberty, given that all of our liberties have limits, and normally one of those limits is you can't kill innocent, third parties. And so it's good in explaining why Roe and Casey were wrongly decided, why the Constitution, rightly understood, doesn't have anything in it that could remotely support a right to abortion. And then it's also good in explaining why the stare decisis considerations, because if you're a judge, stare decisis is a consideration. You do want to say that, if a court has previously addressed an issue, you don't just want to throw it by the wayside, without any consideration. But he goes through very methodically and says, I forget now if it was 4 or 5 different factors that Alito used to explain why this, actually shouldn't be deferred to. It was wrongly decided. It was egregiously wrongly decided. It's about an important issue. It's not a trivial issue. The American people have never decided it. It's a contentious. He goes through one by one, explaining why neither the Roe nor Casey opinion deserves any form of kind of stare decisis deference. All that said, all that it has now done is allowed several states to have their pro-life laws go into effect. Mm-hmm. But the majority of Americans live in jurisdictions where abortion is still legal. Yeah. And that means the majority of unborn babies live in jurisdictions where they can be lawfully killed. Right. And that's why there's a lot more work to be done.
So you brought up the demagoguing in the wake of the opinion. And I think that's something really important to touch on. As I kind of see these, threads moving throughout the media and online, it's like people don't even know what pregnancy is or the basics of, the female reproductive system. That's the real misinformation that's going on. So walk us through a lot of the lies that they're telling about abortion access, who's getting abortions, why, etc.
Sure. I mean, I would say the biggest lie that has been told is that the pro-life laws would criminalize either care in the case of a miscarriage or care in the case of something like an apoptotic pregnancy. Apoptotic pregnancy is where a pregnancy, the unborn child doesn't implant in the uterus. It implants somewhere outside of the uterus. Most frequently, it implants in the fallopian tube. That pregnancy, that child will not continue living. It can only develop so far, and then it's going to rupture the fallopian tube. It's going to kill the unborn child, and it threatens not only the health of the mother, but also the very life of the mother. And so every pro-life ethicist that I know of, using a form of moral reasoning known as the doctrine of double effect, comes straight out of Thomas Aquinas in his exposition of why it's okay to use lethal force in self-defense, that if you were to attack me, I can repel you. Going so far as to even use force that I know might prove to be lethal if it's justified in the case of an unjust aggressor attacking me, provided that my intention isn't to kill you. right? My intention is to ward you off, it's to repel you, but I can foresee that an unintended but foreseen side effect would be your death. The same logic, every pro-life bioethicist, moral thinker that I know of who has written on this question says that you can use a form of medical care to treat the ectopic pregnancy, to treat another example, uterine cancer, where the mother, there is a medical intervention to treat the mother, where the intention is not to kill the unborn baby, right? The death of the unborn child does nothing to preserve the life of the mother, does nothing to preserve the health of the mother. But what does need to happen is you might have to remove a cancerous uterus, or you might have to remove an embryo that's developing in a location that's inhospitable to life, both to the embryo's life and to the mother's life, where the death of the child would be foreseen, it's not intended. All of the state pro-life laws that we know of, my co-author, Alexander DeSanctis, and two different scholars at the Charlotte Logier Institute, which is like the research arm of the Susan B. Anthony list, both teams went through every state pro-life law that exists, and they all have explicit protection for medicine treating mothers in these sorts of situations. They explicitly state that the ban on abortion doesn't cover these sorts of procedures because these sorts of procedures aren't elective abortions. So that's just like, one example of the type of, I would say, intentionally misleading media narratives. And I think in particular, it's dangerous to do this. I mean, it's clearly being done to try to sway public opinion, right? They would rather be talking about life of the mother exceptions, and they would want to be talking about late-term abortions or, even midterm 20-week abortion bans, which, as far as I can tell, hugely popular with the American people. One of our political parties supports a 20-week ban. The other one of our political parties does not. They don't want to talk about that stuff. But a side effect of this is that some women will actually believe, if they're having a miscarriage or if they're having ectopic pregnancy, that their state law prohibits care in that situation, right? And so it's a dangerous lie to be telling at the service of an unjust political movement to begin with.
Do you want to get more involved with American Moment? Do you want to get off the couch and stop just watching a podcast about the issues you care about? Then you need to go to americanmoment.org/join. If you fill that form out, one of our team members will meet with you and we'll discuss how best to get you involved in politics and public policy here in DC. Maybe that involves you coming and working at a think tank or a congressional office. Maybe you're in business and it means just holding on for a few years until we get the next presidential administration. Maybe you're a very wealthy person who wants to give us a bunch of money. Either way, go to americanmoment.org/join to meet with a member of our team and get involved more substantively in trying to save this country. It's not enough to listen to podcasts. You actually have to do something. The second layer to this that people often bring up is that doctors are being deterred for fear of legal repercussion providing care in these circumstances. Is there any truth to that? Have you seen any examples?
There shouldn't be. There have been some medical doctors who have said this, and I think some of them might be acting in good faith, some of them might be acting in bad faith. But I think it's a huge failure on the part of the various hospitals, the various medical systems, the various lawyers at the hospitals. The laws all use the same kind of legal jargon, which is, reasonable medical judgment, right? And that's the technical legal language that is used in a whole host of other medical situations, where it says, in a doctor's reasonable medical judgment, X, Y, and Z procedure is necessary, right? The procedure in the case of ectopic pregnancy or the case of a miscarriage, et cetera, et cetera. And so some physicians are saying, well, I thought this meant that you needed to be, actively dying before I could do something. And it doesn't say anything about imminent death in the, it says, a condition that would pose a significant risk to like a major bodily system or to life in a doctor's reasonable medical judgment. And then, fill in the blank with terms of medical care that could be provided. And some medical doctors have said, well, I thought this meant that, it had to be, I have to wait until it's like imminent that if I don't do something, you'll die. And that's not what the law actually says. And it's not what any kind of reasonable interpretation of the law would require.
It's also highly unlikely that any large scale hospital system is telling their doctors that.
Right.
Probably, right.
I think it's more likely that they haven't actually done the necessary education to prepare doctors for the day when Dobbs was going to be decided, right? I mean, so it's all the more egregious because we had the leak. So, back in the middle, end of winter, beginning of spring, if you now know it's highly likely that come the end of June, we're getting a Supreme Court opinion that's going to overrule Roe and Casey, and that our state has this pro-life law that's going to spring into effect should Roe and Casey be gone, you might want to actually read that law and then have training sessions for your doctors. But pro-life doctors have been taking care of pregnant mothers for the past 50 years during Roe. And even though there was a legal right to abortion, pro-life doctors don't perform abortions, and they have not been letting their mothers die, right? So I'm friends with some of the physicians at the what is the full name of APLOG? It's the American Academy of Pro-Life Obstetrician and Gynecologists, APLOG. It's a great organization. And, you go to their website and they have all these kind of like debunking of the lies that the left has been telling on this. But also they will tell you just from their personal experience. They are pro-life OBGYNs, and, they haven't allowed their mother patients, because they would say both human beings are their patients, right? They're the doctor both for the child and for the mother. And they don't see it as in competition. They don't see it as a zero-sum game. They have a Hippocratic duty to both patients. Sometimes all they can do is save one of those patients, right? But they're not pitting them against each other. And so they think it's, it's a corruption of medicine to allow either the lawyers or the activists, or in some cases, activist doctors themselves, to make it seem like pro-life laws would prohibit good medicine.
The muddying of the waters of questions of ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages leads me to get pretty concerned about what actual enforcement is going to look like in states where abortion has been banned outright. What is the ways that you guys are anticipating there's going to be trickery when it comes to actual enforcement, using these exceptions as a way to create a more general license for abortion at the micro level of, a particular doctor and a particular patient, because there will still be doctors that I'm sure have an ideological commitment to abortion and patients who want to get one. Where do you think there's going to be room for mistakes?
To a certain extent, like, this is where I defer to actual lawyers. So for our listeners or viewers, I am not a lawyer, right? I'm a PhD, not a JD.
Which is why we can see you in the mirror.
But simply to say that there will be, this is not to denigrate the legal craft. Like, we actually do need people to have the expertise to write laws so that they do allow for, justified forms of medicine to be practiced, but don't allow, therefore, like, loopholes to be exploited, right? Because I don't think it's a loophole to say that care in the case of a cancerous uterus, or care in the case of miscarriage, or care in the case of ectopic pregnancies, those aren't exceptions, right? I actually think it's a mistake when pro-lifers ourselves speak of life of the mother exceptions. Well, no, because those aren't abortions to begin with, right? I mean, I think it's important that you look at the train of, like, practical rationality, the intentionality, the objective that's being sought. So to a certain extent, I leave it to the lawyers on how to craft that. But I do think it's important for kind of those of us who are more in the kind of moral philosophy and / like shaping of, like, public opinion, to point out that it would be a luxury if we were in the situation in which we were just trying to prevent so-called loopholes from being exploited. We're still at a point as a pro-life movement where in many jurisdictions we can't even get, like, basic pro-life laws enacted. Pro-life laws that the vast majority of American people, report to pollsters that they would support. And so, I would like to, move from where we currently are in many jurisdictions to a situation in which we're just debating the technical question of, like, which lawyer is giving us the best advice of how to craft the legislative language so that protections for good medicine don't get exploited by doctors who want to then be doing unlawful abortions under the guise of life-saving medical care. That would be a much better situation to inhabit than where we currently are.
I think one of the most jarring things that I've noticed in the wake of the ruling is just how many financial and organizational incentives there are to get an abortion. People actively and companies and governments paying for abortions, incentivizing people to get one, lobbying for increased access. Who pays for all this stuff and why?
Well, I mean, so look, at the end of the day, all these costs get passed on to consumers, right? So if you say, like, who pays for all this stuff, like, you and I do, our viewers, our listeners to, if you shop at any of the companies that have announced that they were going to be paying for, like, you know, if you live in a pro-life state, we'll pay up to $5,000 for you to travel to California to have your abortion.
Should that be banned?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't even think that's a hard, because put it this way, I think abortion should be banned, right? So I think that you should not be able to lawfully kill another human being in the womb. Therefore, you should not be able to pay to send someone to a jurisdiction where it's legal to kill someone in the room. Like, I don't think it should be a hard question of if we think the underlying action should be prohibited because it's unjust, then ancillary actions that are meant to kind of subsidize that or to skirt, you know, our state pro-life law, we're going to, you know, find a way of getting around. Yes, we should be finding, and look, there might be, again, not being a lawyer, I haven't thought about this. There could be like certain constitutional, and my response is then we should find a way to prohibit it that doesn't run afoul of constitutional options. But if we can't say that like a state doesn't have the authority to pass a law to prevent people from going out of state to kill people, like that strikes me as a problem. And if the end of the day, the solution really is that, like, you know, state X can't prevent you from going out of state and, you know, killing someone in state Y, then that's a role for Congress. Yeah. Right. I mean, so at whatever level it is, if you want to say, look, this is interstate commerce, and so the states can't regulate it themselves, only Congress. Well, then at the very least, Congress should be able to say that you shouldn't be able to go out of state, again, because we're talking about killing another human being. I mean, I think it's important. I think many of us have been desensitized to the evil of abortion, right? And I use the word evil intentionally. I think some of the attacks on pregnancy resource centers really highlighted the evil nature of this. Not only because like sometimes like actual satanic imagery was used during the attacks, but if you think about what a pregnancy resource center is, they aren't the ones doing like what I do, you know, actually like making public arguments about the immorality, the injustice of abortion. All they do is they assist women who voluntarily come to them seeking assistance to choose life, right? And so one side is saying we are pro-choice, but we're going to do everything in our power to actually make it more difficult for women to choose life by attacking the very centers dedicated to assisting women to choose life. I think many of us are desensitized to like just how abhorrent, evil, unjust the act of abortion is. And I think partly that's because we don't have a full enough appreciation for the goodness of life. I don't think we have a profound enough respect for, you know, the dignity of life properly understood. I mean, there are philosophical arguments you can make. I think the strongest argument anyone can make is that we're all made in the image and likeness of God, right? And so I think that theological argument, and if you recognize that every human being is made in God's very image and likeness, then the act of killing another human being without justification, right? Sometimes it's going to be necessary war, it's going to be necessary self-defense, et cetera, but without, you know, killing another innocent human being, it should be something that's really horrific. And I think we've been grossly desensitized to it. Well,
and this just exposes too how we're not, conservatives generally are not willing to play by the same rules. Like the first thing that comes to mind for me is like, you know, you remember all these, we talked with Congressman Dan Bishop about all his like the transgender bathroom bill, right? And how these companies would come in and they would say, cool, we're just going to boycott your entire state. You know, we're not going to send any products to your state or whatever. Why don't we do the same thing from the other side, right? Okay, General Mills, you're going to pay for your, you know, all your employees to, you know, go to another state to have an abortion. Cool.
Your cereal can't get sold in schools anymore.
Yeah, it can't get sold in schools anymore. State's not paying for it.
I think
whatever.
Ron DeSantis has, you know, shown some leadership on that. I mean, I think, look, it would be better if we lived in a world in which we did not have to politicize all of our consumer choices and in which we did not. But given that that's not the world we're living in, one side can't say, like, you know, detente, or one side can't say, you know, we're not going to engage in that while the other side is. And so it may very well be that the way that you arrive at a detente is precisely by both sides saying, well, there's mutually assured destruction. If you play this game, we play it. And then both sides say, well, wouldn't it actually be better for all of us if we stop doing this.
In fact, that's the only way, historically speaking, that détentes are arrived at. There is no historical analog.
But you can't have a one-sided. Right? I mean, that's what I don't think. And so, like, I would rather not have to be in a situation in which conservatives, Republicans, whatever, are engaged in, that form of kind of like an economic policy where you're like picking winners and losers in that precise sense of like, all right, we're changing suppliers at our public schools because this supplier has politics that we disagree with. But when it's about something like this, I mean, this is a life and death issue. It's different than like what should the marginal tax rate be, and like they're lobbying for a free trade policy or for a tax reduction that we don't like, whatever. But then too, if the other side's doing it, so that when Mike Pence signs Indiana's RFRA into law, Indiana gets boycotted. When I forget who the governor was at the time in North Carolina signs HB2 into law, North Carolina gets boycotted. There needs to be some neutralization there, so then no more state gets boycotted.
I think California government employees still to this day can't
travel.
Yeah, they cannot expense travel to Texas, North Carolina, and a bunch of other states, which like to this day, like that's the government of California is, I believe, the second largest employer in the country after the federal government, maybe the third after Walmart. Like that, it's that large. And so it's a huge thing. I'm curious.
And let me just add one thing there. And what it could be is that you get, maybe it's through, I was going to say RAGA, but RAGA is the Attorney General Association. But, you find out what the functional equivalent is for, the governorship or for state houses. And you actually say, all right, it's not just going to be like the 3 states that are currently on that list for California, but it's going to be all states that are governed right now by Republicans having like a solidarity where there's, you form like a, it would almost be like an alliance, but it's now domestic rather than foreign relations wise. And you say, all right, if one of our states get boycotted, all of our states respond. Yeah. And I think we are, unfortunately, because it would be better if we didn't live in this world, but this is the world we live in. We're going to have to be thinking tactically along those lines.
Well, and that's the case for doing something like this, is you can't hardly spend $1 in this economy without supporting literal baby murder. Like name a Fortune 500 company whose money in some way is not going to this stuff. I mean, you even look at supporting things like professional sports. Nate Hockman just had this piece in NNR about how many MLB teams are actively paying for sex changes, right? Yep. I mean, it's you can't pick, a school lunch provider that's not local, that's not, again, actively paying for baby murder. And so I think, we have to utilize power somehow to get out of that scenario.
And that's where what is his name? Is it Peter Rex? He had a great op-ed in Newsweek.
Yeah.
Saying, it's his company. He was going to, I think it was like a $5,000 stipend for adoption.
Yeah.
And, I forget, is it real estate? I forget exact what line of work Peter's in. But so I don't know how I would actually then, patronize his companies because, I don't invest in real estate or whatever. But I think finding situations like that where you do see companies doing the right thing, and then you can go out of your way. And you can also do that. I think of this sometimes with like food purchases. Like, yes, it is cheaper to shop at Costco, and yes, we do shop at Costco, but yes, like we buy from those farm stands on the side of the road as well. And some of it is because like it's actually better quality. Some of it is like we actually want to support the local farms in our community, and we're willing to pay a slightly higher margin. We're fortunate that we can pay, afford to pay that slightly higher margin. So I don't want to make it seem like, if you're shopping at Walmart or Costco, you're doing something wrong. Because like for many people, like that's the only way they can afford to get fresh produce. We're fortunate that we can shop at some of those farm stands, and we do it partly because it tastes better, but partly because we want to support the local farmers in our community. And I think something similar can be brought to bear when we're thinking about who is subsidizing abortion and who's not, who's subsidizing adoption.
I want to spend some time talking about the sociology and psychology of the pro-life movement, the conservative movement, and the Republican Party, which are 3 separate things. Knowing full well that you can't and probably shouldn't name names or organizations, I'm curious, what has been the kind of temperature check shock that's been felt across those institutions from your vantage point now that we're the dog that caught the car,
right,
on the thing that we've said that we've wanted for the past 30 years? How are institutions adjusting, and how do the people inside those institutions actually feel and think about this new reality we live in?
Yeah, I mean, lots to say there with, again, and I'm not a psychologist or a sociologist. So you've asked me to do this sociology and psychology here.
Yeah.
I would say one is that universally, everyone I've spoken with has been a sense of deep elation that, they weren't just doing this for a paycheck. Like, people working in the pro-life movement, actually, so which institution are we talking about? So let me start with the pro-life movement. They've been deeply just, filled with, gratitude. Like, this is what they had been working for, right? The proximate goal was overturning Roe. Ultimate goal is protecting all the babies and their mothers. But the first necessary step here to pass meaningfully protective laws in jurisdictions was getting rid of Roe and Casey. And so there's been a deep sense of just satisfaction, gratitude, happiness, joy, because that's what they were working on in the pro-life movement. Second thing I would say is there's been a deep sense of frustration in the pro-life movement that many of the political leaders have not been as outspoken. There was an op-ed recently that I read, if I remember correctly, it was from Charlie Camosi, saying that, civil society leaders can only do so much if our political leaders who have the bully pulpit, who have access to major national media, who go on the talk shows, are unwilling to speak out in defense of life, or unwilling to combat the lies that the media is telling about these pro-life laws. There's only so much that, the president of SBA List or the president of American United for Life or that Lila Rose at Live Action can do, given that, those three individuals, those three institutions don't have nearly the reach of a Mitch McConnell, right? And so, like, a frustration that there hasn't been more done politically to shape public opinion, right? I mean, this is where I think sometimes people learn the wrong lesson from the phrase that politics is downstream from culture. Like, I think it's a bad imagery because it makes it seem like it's unidirectional. Politics shapes our culture just as much as our culture shapes politics. And the law is a teacher, and congressional hearings can be teachers. And what politicians say and do shapes public opinion. It's not just that the politicians are shaped by public opinion, they shape public opinion. And so, as much as I appreciate Andrew Breitbart and things that he has, things that he did in his life, I think that particular quote, and it's also my understanding is that wasn't the fullness of what he was saying, and that the quote's taken out of context, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a criticism of him, but it's people have learned the wrong lesson.
Yeah. It's usually just an excuse to do nothing. That's essentially the way it's been utilized.
But then the other thing I will say, because you asked about the sociology and psychology here, is that there's going to be an interesting. Many people who have worked in the pro-life movement and the conservative movement more broadly in DC have known for decades which politicians campaign at home saying they're pro-life, saying they're going to vote to appoint originalist justices to overturn Roe. And then as soon as they get to DC, they want to do nothing to advance the pro-life ball. They tell leadership, don't bring a 20-week bill, don't bring a 15-week bill, don't bring a heartbeat bill, don't bring anything to the floor, don't force me to vote on this, right? All of a sudden, they no longer have the easy talking point of, I'm going to vote to confirm justices to overturn Roe and Casey. Now the question is, like, what are you actually going to do? Like, how are you as a lawmaker, a member of a legislative body, going to protect babies, going to protect mothers, going to serve those in need? And so I think sociologically, where, some of us in DC have known, who's actually a pro-life advocate and who just mouths the platitudes, that's going to be better known to the general public. And then the last thing I'll say is that sociologically, there are internal disagreements about how much incrementalism and how much abolitionism. Everyone agrees, with the broad brushstroke of incrementalism at the service of abolition, right? But then once you try to titrate that, and once you say in particular circumstances, should right now pro-life congressional Republicans be pushing for a 20-week bill, a 15-week bill, or a 6-week bill, or a conception bill, right? That's where you'll see there's some disagreement. you can contrast any of those things with the Democrats, and it makes for, an illuminating contrast. Public opinion, though, and this is where you get the prudential disagreements. Public opinion is more strongly with us on the 20 weeks, a little bit less strongly with us on the 15 weeks. There's a decent drop off when you get down to 6 weeks, and then it's a more substantial drop down as you get to conception. And so there are, and that's at the national level, right? Different states have different, and so there are kind of questions of tactics of, how fast, how soon have we laid the groundwork? What are we doing to shape public opinion? And it's just really hard, I would say, for kind of pro-life civic leaders to be doing this without the political buy-in. And it's a cop-out to say this is just a state issue,
right? Which
is what many of the federal officials, right? Many of the people in this city are doing right now. That's their talking point, is that Dobbs sent it back to the states. It's not what Dobbs says, right? Sends it back to the democratic branches of government, the legislative branches of government. And the corollary of the Robbie George, John Finnis argument about 14th Amendment personhood that the justices could have adopted is also that legislators and executive branch can adopt this. Right? I mean, they take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. Section 5 of the 14th Amendment explicitly says Congress has been granted new powers to enforce the protections that Section 1 actually articulates. So that's, you could use that as a justification for the laws. You could use interstate commerce justification. There's a variety of hooks if you need a hook for why the federal government has an interest in protecting life.
So in talking about public opinion, I think you've hit on something very interesting. A lot of the, I think, response from people on the left has been, 55% of people disapprove of that, therefore you can't do it. There are a lot of people living in this kind of lunacy world where they think, we live in a direct democracy. I think the flip side, though, is also true for conservatives. They say, 55% of people are against it. We want to maintain, we want to win a majority. We want to, be able to have some power, not just on this issue, but on other issues. So when it comes to, people who are working in this town, not just in the pro-life movement, but in the conservative movement more broadly, how should they be thinking about public opinion and what, the voting population thinks of pro-life laws?
I mean, I think one thing that you can say universally about public opinion on abortion is that almost all of the polls are poorly worded, and that the American people don't actually know all that much.
Including the poll that was put on the ballot in Kansas.
That was, I think, worded as a ballot initiative.
Yeah.
It was too long.
Yeah.
Right? You need it to be simple.
Yeah.
You need it to be easier to understand. And unfortunately, it was written before Dobbs, right? And so the context of, when they drafted that ballot initiative, and then when it was actually put up for a vote, Dobbs had happened in between, and So I think that was a misstep. But I don't just think it was, because it was a giant paragraph and it was, hard to decipher what exactly it was doing. I also think we didn't have any national leadership on that issue. So the left, whenever and I learned this the hard way with the Indiana RFRA, with some of the religious liberty battles after Obergefell, with some of the transgender battles, conservatives view these things, that's a state issue. The left turns whatever state battle is hottest into a national issue. And so they bring their national talent and their national media to whichever state battleground is, happening at the moment. And then we say, we'll just leave it to the local state legislators and the local state think tank to handle this. And then we see the results, right? And so it's actually important that both national groups and national political leaders use the bully pulpit to defend these state battles, because the left's bringing in national groups, national talent, et cetera, et cetera. There was a second part of your question, about public opinion. I mean, I think the important thing here is that most of these public opinion polls show something like this. I support Roe v. Wade. I also support restrictions on abortion that are inconsistent with Roe v. Wade. Right? The American people don't really know what they're talking about because they don't fully understand what Roe did. And I think just in general, public opinion polling shows that most people are not as ideologically coherent or as consistent in their viewpoints as people like us who, think about this stuff a lot and, are deeply kind of philosophically, principally grounded, blah, blah, blah. People are a grab bag of conflicting views. People's opinions are shaped by elite opinion. People's opinions are shaped by what they perceive to be the, quote, right side of history. People's opinions are shaped by what they find to be persuasive, right? And so I don't think we should, lick our finger, see which way the winds are blowing based upon public opinion polling and then say, enact our policy to match that. We should be using all of the tools at our disposal to try to shape public opinion to be in accordance with the truth. Right? And that also means you need the law, you need celebrities, you need intellectuals, you need grassroots activists, you need politicians. You need Hollywood, you need all of the above, because all of those things I mentioned shape public opinions in various ways. Right?
How are you thinking about the coalitional aspect of how the pro-life movement integrates into the conservative movement and how the conservative movement integrates into the Republican Party, i.e. a part but not the whole of each of those entities? What I'm sure many national Republican leaders are saying privately is, you guys got your win. We are paying a political price for it. Leave us alone for a little while. What would you say? And how are you thinking about what people whose principal concern is the life issue, how should they operate intra-coalitional politics?
Yep. The quote you just paraphrased is a recipe to lose, right? That's a recipe for defeat. If you are known as the pro-life party, but you are unwilling to articulate why and to defend why, then you're allowing the other side to actually frame what it is that you stand for, and they're not going to give you very good framing. And I think that's what we've seen happen over the past several weeks. It's why some of the public opinion polls, insofar as you can trust those opinion polls, because again, I think some of the people conducting the polls, have a vested interest in how they come out. But insofar as you have seen support for abortion go up, support for the pro-life cause go down, support for Democrats in the generic midterm election go up, support for Republicans in generic go down. It's not because Republicans are talking too much about abortion. It's because they won't actually defend the truth of the matter, and they're allowing the left, pro-abortion activists, to frame the debate and then to monopolize. It's become almost like a monologue, and there's not even a debate happening. Right. And so I think that would be one response. Second, I would say is that political parties are instrumentally valuable. Right. There's nothing like, about the party as such that demands our loyalty or our adherence. It's much more about what is the party going to do for the value at stake, for the moral truth that's at stake. And, we can go through a host of issues. I mean, life's not the only thing that I care about. It's the most important. I mean, I do think there's kind of a set of priorities here, and there have been other numerically discrete, you could call them interest groups or factions of political movements that have been able to punch way above their weight class by telling the political party, if you aren't prioritizing our issues, we may not come out this election. And I think for too long, pro-lifers were taken for granted because where else were you going to go?
Right.
And
that is facially
still
it makes sense because you're describing a monolithically pro-abortion political party on one side, and at worst a Republican Party that will keep stasis. So there is something to that, right? Of course. And so I'm curious how you think about it.
And so I think there, what you suggest is that you don't want to stay home because the people on the left are going to be worse, right? As you just said, at least with the people on the right, you're going to get stasis. People on the left, you're going to, get bad justices, bad policies. Now, was it just last week? Was it on Friday afternoon? They announced that the VA is going to be performing abortions, even though that's not what the statute allows for, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So
they don't really care.
Of course, right? And so you can see it, at the administrative state level, at the legislative level, judicial level, it's going to be bad. And so here I think it's more of a, let me help you. Help me to help you. I guess that's the phrase from the movie there. I think if Republicans want to win, the life issue is an asset for them. And they have to do it. They have to be able to speak about it in a coherent, intelligent way. They have to be able to draw the contrast between the radicalness, the extremity, the extreme nature of the left on these issues, and then where they are. Realizing that the bill that they might be wanting to vote on today is not yet what the three of us would ultimately be happy with. But the contrast that you can draw between a 15-week bill and abortion on demand at taxpayer expense is a pretty helpful contrast that cuts in our favor.
Yeah.
And so I think like one starting point for the coalitional side of the politics is to actually help people who are campaigning see how they can speak and position themselves on various social issues in a way that are actually popular with voters, because voters are actually much more socially conservative than they are economically libertarian. And yet all of our elected officials seem to have no problem talking out of a kind of Club for Growth handbook.
I just want Republican senators to fight as hard for the life issue as they do for the carried interest loophole. Would it be that difficult?
But no. But I mean, there's also, I mean, some of this is why what SBA list does is so important, because some of this is financial.
Yeah.
Right. You're going to get a campaign contribution. There's going to be some financial backing if you support the right economic policies. Will there be a financial backing if you support the right social policies?
Right.
And then the flip side of this, I mean, this is something that, we've been talking about with friends for a decade now, is that there are no scalps that will be taken if you go the wrong way.
Right.
Rick Santorum, they took his scalp. Right. The left said because he was leading on social issues, we're going to go after him. Dan Lipinski, right, the last pro-life Democrat in a pretty safe district for the Democrats, they primaried him because he was a pro-life Democrat. They took us. We don't do enough of that, and I think that can also be helpful.
Yeah,
in enforcing what are kind of the bright lines, what are the you don't cross this line if you want our support. But that means it needs to be backed up, not just, what people like I do, we have a bunch of like academics who write books. We also need the people who actually get into the transactional nature of politics, right, which involves money. And this is why I think it's important what Marjorie has done with SBA list, because they're backing candidates and they're protecting people who do courageous things and they're opposing people who do cowardly things. And that's not a inappropriate function in a type of democratic polity that we have, right? That's actually part of doing politics, not just talking about politics. And I think too many social conservatives, we have like lots of pastors and lots of law firms and lots of scholars, and obviously like I'm one of the latter, so it's not what we need. In addition to that are people who actually do like the political campaigning side of things.
So you've mentioned a couple times this theoretical concept of a Republican, right now that would be proudly and decisively campaigning on the life issue. Let's take a platonic example of, some constituency, some district or state in the country that, Republicans running for office, they could win. They could either lose by 2 points or they could win by 6 points. So they're in kind of a, 8-point swing district, but probably going to win. How would you counsel that they campaign on this issue in a way that you think is popular and effective?
Yeah. All right. So, now I really don't want to commit malpractice because here, in case, because you guys probably do have candidates who will be listening.
Ryan says I am not a campaign expert.
Well, because I do think there's something of an art. I'm not going to, say it's a science, but it would really be context dependent. Right? So if J.D. Vance is running in Ohio, I would want to know a lot more about what currently kind of Ohio public opinion looks like, what his opponent has said or not said on these issues, to draw like the best contrast possible. But I think it is a contrast that you have to draw. Right? I don't think it's just this is what I believe about the life issue without also connecting it to what your opponent believes, and then highlighting, this is where we currently are in the state of Ohio. this is where we could be.
Mm-hmm.
Also recognizing that they're running for the U.S. Senate, right? So it's not even as if they're actually dealing with, state level law. But again, because the symbolic nature of politics, that even if you're not running for a seat that gives you any authority over the laws in my state, because you're representing my state in Congress, I want to know where you come down on various issues. And I think just drawing that contrast can be helpful. And then I think you want to speak in ways that are not kind of foot and mouth moments, obviously, right? So you don't want to have, who was the
Todd Aiken.
You knew exactly where I was, so I don't even have to repeat his foot and mouth, but stuff like that. But also then I think...
Do you think that's part of the reason why so many Republicans are reticent to talk about this issue on the trail, is that by making it a greater campaign issue, like the degrees of freedom chances that something will go wrong increases?
Possibly.
Yeah.
I have not spoken with enough candidates or their consultants. I think it's more the consultants aren't comfortable with this because I think the consultants aren't really pro-life. I mean, I think this is where personnel is policy. I think this has much more to do with what are the priorities and the deepest convictions of the staffers. This is what I saw during the marriage debate, was that you had members who were solidly committed to the truth about marriage, but they were staffed by a bunch of people who secretly disagreed with them. And it was secret. Like, they weren't telling their boss that they disagreed, but you could feel them out and see actually where they stood on the issue. And then that was hugely counterproductive.
Yeah, I think I'm probably willing to say that every single Republican member of Congress on the Hill has a staff that the median point of the staff is more socially liberal than the member itself. Every single one.
Yep.
I can't think of an example of,
highlights the importance of what you guys are doing, right? Because like personnel is policy.
I think it even works for like the really establishment members of Congress too. Like basically all those staffers are like, they're liberals. Like that's it works basically across the whole spectrum.
It's
but the other thing I was gonna say is not just the, don't have the Todd Aiken foot and mouth moment. You also want to be able to say what you're for, right? I mean, so I think like this is also where, we're in a better moment. It's providential that Dobbs comes out when it does, given that there's a new willingness on the right to consider ways in which we could support working families, ways in which we could support mothers with unplanned pregnancies. And you can talk, I mean, look at what Texas did. What was it? Was it HB5, HR5? What was the heartbeat bill? Whatever the lettering for the heartbeat bill was. Prohibits abortion after 6 weeks. The same session, the legislature allocates, $100 million for the Texas Alternatives to Abortion program. The media covered the former, did not cover the latter, at least the national media, right? So most of our listeners might not be familiar with the $100 million that went to the Texas Alternatives to Abortion program.
Although they were suddenly covering a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse in a government program, which is incredibly rare.
It only happens in the aid to the Alternatives to Abortion program. But that's something where you can say, look, I'm going to be supporting the child tax credit. I believe this is a Tom Cotton bill, that it should kick in at conception rather than at birth. Right? Look, this is marginal, but it can make a difference if for those 9 months you're getting some financial assistance to help you make your time being a pregnant mother that much more feasible. These are ways in which I think we can speak, where we can say, my commitment to being pro-life means I'm against lethal violence in the womb. It also means I'm in favor of supporting mothers and fathers and families. And here are some concrete ways of doing it. Even Mitt Romney, right? The guy who a decade ago talked about the makers and the takers, the 47%, the severe conservative, he's now introduced, I forget now the acronym for his, but his kind of family policy plan, it's getting people at AEI and at EPPC and at the Institute for Family Studies and a variety of other groups across the spectrum to actually say, we support this. And that's something new that's happening. And that's, to my mind, it's providential that you can put these things together.
So on this, I found myself in a weird position over the past year or so, basically, where I, very publicly supportive of all sorts of creative thinking on economic issues on the right. But at the same time, I can't help but get a little bit concerned, because it feels like, and you have more clarity into this than I do, but, let's say during the Bush years, one of the classic retorts the left would make is that you're not pro-life, you're pro-birth birth. You're not supportive of any economic policies that actually help families. I want to, I don't even know if this is necessarily important or valuable, but I want to protect the ability for people to be just anti-killing babies. That is okay. That is a perfectly reasonable position to hold in and of itself. They don't have to be on board for all my wacky economic ideas.
Those should be debated on the merits.
Right. And so how are you thinking about the trade-offs there, starting to uplift this set of issues into the conversation about life, because all these national organizations that are very well funded need something to do. How are you thinking about, are we going to start conceding that the left was right and we do need to support some level of economic support for families if we're going to be authentically pro-life? Or how are you thinking about that, and how are you pitching it to people?
Yeah, no, I mean, so what we say in the book is we explicitly say that, there's not kind of like a pro-life litmus test for what sort of family policy should you support. That family policy and pro-life policy, there's some overlaps. And, insofar as this is a good piece of family policy, pro-lifers should want to support it. But it's not as if you're not pro-life unless you support whatever the, kind of like most progressive family policy du jour is. Because it may very well be the case that you legitimately think that X, Y, and Z piece of family policy is going to do more harm than good. I mean, and this could be like a Helen Andrews style argument of it's going to lead more mothers working outside of the home. And, she wants to prioritize mothers being at home caring for their kids. Or you could say it's going to lead to more intentional non-marital births, because for every additional child that you have, you get an additional government grant, whatever. I mean, there are like valid reasons to be concerned on the merits with whatever a given piece of family policy is going to be. My point here is that, as a political matter, right? If you ask, giving advice to a candidate, it's much better to be able to say whatever it is that you think is the proper role of government vis-a-vis family policy, to be able to pair those things. Like whatever it is that you do think there's a valid role here. And I do think I'm not a libertarian. Like I do think there's a more space for a valid role for government to assist with family formation, to assist women with unplanned pregnancies. If we are now telling women that, 6 months ago you had a supposed, a declared by the Supreme Court constitutional right to abort this child, and now we're saying under law you need to carry this child to term, what are we willing to do to empower that mother to actually fulfill now her legal obligation? She always had a moral obligation there. And I think it needs to be a variety of responses. I mean, I don't want to see public policy that then actually crowds out civil society solutions. I mean, I actually think it would be a problem if things like the Texas Alternative to Abortion program were structured in a way that they put out of business the pregnancy resource centers. And you could see that, we just create the government version of the pregnancy resource centers. And to my mind, that would be a mistake. Much better to find ways of supporting Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center, the Northwest Center, Birthright Loudoun County. Like much better to find ways of giving them more resources that then they can work with more women in need than to create like another government solution, government program that's, doing it directly.
Why? Yeah.
Because I think almost all of the examples we have of the government-run solutions is that they don't actually provide the benefit that we're seeking. And I think there's actually something intangible in the sense of this, the interpersonal relationship that could be formed at a Pregnancy Hill Pregnancy Center is going to be different than the relationship that's formed at the government run version of that. But again, that's not to say there's not a role for the state, right? Because I sense that your follow-up question was, oh no, like Ryan's giving me some like libertarian talking point. No, my point is that family policy, conservative family policy should be conservative, right? This was a piece that Wells King from American Compass and Patrick Brown, my colleague at EPPC, wrote recently for Public Discourse, where they're saying, look, it's not as if that, this now means that we have to embrace, whatever the latest Biden proposal is. Between libertarianism on one hand and then like big government liberalism on the other hand, there's a lot of space, and we can think through what a conservative way of doing it. And I think a conservative way of responding says, all right, well, what are the kind of organic institutions of society, things like families, things like churches, synagogues, other houses of worship, parents, teachers associations, the Lions Club, the Knights of Columbus, all of these kind of little platoons. And then how do we actually support those institutions rather than supplant them?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
He said little platoon.
I know you don't like that term, but
it's all in good faith.
Little platoons are good. Okay, so
but it's not an either or. I mean, I think the mistake is if you're in favor of little platoons, therefore no government, or if you're in favor of a role for the government in assisting family formation and human flourishing, therefore little platoons is a bad word.
Yeah.
We need like a little platoon's fire alarm that sits on the desk. We hit the button, the confetti comes from the ceiling.
It's great. It's the watchword. Drink. So let's suppose 2024 featured a presidential contest, not unlike 2016. You have 17 different flavors of Republican on stage. What in your mind is the gold standard that your favorite candidate would be advocating for on the life side? What they'd be saying will be a legislative / executive like champion proposal of theirs when they get elected. And then on the family policy side, what would correspond to it? When you get to that section of the presidential debates where we talk about values issues, which I've always hated, what
basic
is
justice is a value.
What's the Ryan Anderson registered trademark gold basket of policies?
Being so it's hard to answer that right now because I don't know what's going to happen with the midterm. But I would say being as bold on the pro-life issue as is electorally feasible.
Do you think conception is likely to be in that?
Probably not at this moment.
Okay.
And I regret that that's the case, but my sense is that would probably backfire. But again, it's not a strong, if someone were to run on that and it was working, I would be cheering him on or her on for that matter. I mean, it's a situation in which it's hard at this point because I just think the nature of politics is that it's the art of the possible. And we don't right now know what's going to be possible 2.5 years from now. It may be possible, God willing, that, I don't know who the leading contender is going to be. Maybe it'd be Trump, maybe it'd be DeSantis. I have a friend who thinks it's going to be Nikki Haley, and I think he's crazy.
Okay.
But, that's why
we're making fun of that guy on the show.
But, who knows who's it going to be? Let's say it is Nikki Haley. And, and let's say it's possible that you could have a conception bill. Run with that. And we should be cheering her on. We should be supporting that. If it's not, and, a heartbeat bill, a 6-week bill seems to be the best we can hope for, we should be cheering that. If not, if it's a 15-week bill, right? And right now, I don't know what that answer is, right? And I don't think that's a cop-out. I think that's very much of this needs to actually be like a context dependent answer, and we don't yet know that context. Because a lot could happen between now and then for good or ill.
What do you think the landscape for abortion access in the 50 states is likely to look like in 10 years?
In 10 years? I don't know if I want to be as bold as to say it's possible that we'll actually have... I mean, it depends which day of the week there are more optimistic and more pessimistic moments. The honest answer is I don't know. The more pessimistic answer is that it won't look very much different than it looks today. Right. And I think that if that ends up happening, it would be deeply tragic. And it would be a sign that the various groups working in, more actively in politics rather than on the kind of like theoretical side of things, we weren't successful in getting our representatives to prioritize the push for life. But it could also mean that those of us who are doing the more theoretical side of things weren't successful at persuading people. I mean, we actually need both. But that would be the more pessimistic, because I think nothing could change. The more optimistic is, I do think within a 10-year window, it's possible that we have a federal law that would protect abortion after the heartbeat's formed. I could see that happening. And if that were to happen, we should all be cheering it on.
Yeah.
Right? But again, like had you asked someone in 2005, right? So right after 2004, all of these states passed their marriage amendments. Where do you think gay marriage will be in a decade? Is anyone going to say it's going to be legal in all 50 states and we're going to be shutting down Catholic adoption agencies and harassing evangelical bakers? The answer is no. But I think someone could have, because unfortunately they had the culture. I mean, the underlying, what's the right way of putting this? The underlying cultural, social, moral beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors were all cutting in their favor, right? In terms of demographics, in terms of church attendance, in terms of various sexual behaviors, sexual beliefs, they were all moving in the direction of greater and greater support of two consenting adults should do with their bodies whatever two consenting adults want to do. Many of those same underlying kind of demographic, sociological trends are there on the abortion debate, and they're not in our favor, right? That's why I'm saying there's also the possibility that, people want to say, oh, well, look, millennials and the next generation, they're more pro-life than their parents' generation. And while they were in favor of gay marriage, they're also more pro-life, right? Simultaneously, like bad on one social issue, good on the other social issue. And I think all of that is true in the abstract when you're taking the public opinion survey. But everyone's in favor of, at least one exception for abortion, and that's when it's them.
Yeah.
Or when it's their girlfriend, or when it's their sister or their daughter. And that's where I, again, on a more pessimistic day, I think nothing changes. Things possibly even get worse. More optimistic, hopeful day. I do think we could see 10 years from now a heartbeat bill at the federal level.
Europe with longer tails seems to me the likely pessimistic take. By longer tails, I mean, Europe, it's basically like everything's between 8 and 15 weeks. In the United States. That's your
pessimistic take. I mean, I think well, I think it could be much worse than that.
Well, that's what I'm saying is longer tails. So we'll have a couple of states that completely ban it, and a couple of states that it's completely allowed. It's just longer tails, which is basically what we have right now. It's we have Europe with longer tails right now. Is that we have, although the center left states are much more polarized to one end.
Our most
than the center
populous
right
states have really, really bad abortion laws, much worse than Europe's. I mean, think about it this way. The Mississippi law that was at stake in Dobbs was only 15 weeks, which makes it on the progressive side of the European bell curve. And that's seen as, a huge pro-life victory. 93% of all abortions take place before 15 weeks.
Right.
Without a legal limit, right? So that's just, on the natural, when do you go to get your abortion? 93% of the time it's happening before 15 weeks. If you now have a legal, limiting principle, the other 7% are just going to say, oh, we got to get it done a little bit earlier, right? Some of those 7% are because, things happen. They get genetic testing later and during the pregnancy, or there can be other factors at play for why someone might think they need a later term abortion, not just, well, we didn't schedule it earlier. But many of them will just be scheduled beforehand. So if that's your pessimistic take, I actually think that's optimistic, because I think we could also continue to see California and New York and Illinois and Massachusetts continue to protect the abortion license throughout all 40 weeks, and then nothing happened at the federal level.
Yeah.
All of that said, I get where you were going with the question, was that, would it really be all of this work for the past 50 years and then adding on your decade of predicting the future, 60 years of the pro-life movement, just to end up with Europe? I mean, that would be very depressing if you thought it was all for that.
Well, and that's the thing is the induction of the pro-life movement was caused by the constitutional usurpation of the Supreme Court. I mean, there's just not a lot of cases in other countries where a national movement with that much support has come into existence. And so assuming that Americans are slightly different, but not different in kind than any other Western country, that seems likely. Now,
so likely, I think that's what you're actually. So you asked what was the best case scenario, what was the worst case scenario. I think what you've described is the likely scenario.
Yeah. Well,
which is that unfortunately we arrive at some, settlement where it's, for the first trimester, have your abortion, second and third trimesters, don't have an abortion.
Yeah.
And that's what many with certain exceptions, right? And so many of those European laws do allow second and third trimester abortions for various well-defined reasons in the statutes. To my mind, that would not be a good outcome.
Yeah.
Right? So neither the most likely outcome nor the worst outcome would be good. And that just means there's a lot of work to be done.
So since you first came on this podcast, you have been at the Ethics and Public Policy Center for a year.
Yep.
And change. What is the role that you think the Ethics and Public Policy Center is going to play in these questions in the coming years? There's a lot of people who used to work at EPPC that no longer do, and there's lots of new people who work at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. What is your vision for the organization?
Sure. I mean, so it's interesting. Many of the questions that we talked about this afternoon are not actually the type of thing that I focus on kind of a day in, day out, because we are not on the kind of like political side of the spectrum as much as the kind of like intellectual and then the connective tissue. And what I mean by that is like, we're not doing like the horse racing of, which candidate, which messaging. We're not doing like the fine tuning of forecasting, should it be 20 or 15 in this moment, given public opinion. We're doing a bigger picture thing of explaining why it is. I mean, so the book that Zan and I wrote, titled or subtitled "Why Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing," book that Carl Trueman has written, Strange New World, the thinkers and activists who created, I forget the exact subtitle, but he's telling a 500-year trajectory of all of the different kind of thinkers and artists and activists that got us in a situation in which it's a plausible concept that a man could be trapped in a woman's body. I think he opens the book by saying, none of my grandparents ever would have given a second thought to the claim that a man could be trapped in a woman's body. And yet today I'm called a bigot because I don't believe it. How did we get here, right? And so the type of, work that Carl's doing, it's taking a step back from some of the day-to-day kind of power politics to think, all right, well, what's the truth about human nature? What's the truth about human flourishing? How can we then document that when we get human nature wrong, there are human costs? And then how can we propose what it is that politics should be supporting, right? And so it's much more, I would say it's committed to a sound understanding of, EPPC is committed to a sound understanding of human dignity and human flourishing within the context of a sound understanding of the American political project. The reason I say sound understanding is that I think there are ways in which the American political project has, there's been like hagiography surrounding it, where it gets simplified just as the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, right? And all you need to know is kind of like Locke's second treatise and that second paragraph of the Declaration, and that's all the political philosophy you need. American political tradition is much more robust, right? You're going to have various aspects of the common law, the natural law. Yes, some Enlightenment liberalism is part of the American project, but it's not the whole. All right, so when you think about the American political order rightly understood, how do we then promote human flourishing rightly understood? That's what we have a host of scholars working on these sorts of issues. Whether we have explicit programs in Catholic studies and in evangelicals and civic life. Carl Trueman's housed there, Andrew Walker's housed there, Brad Littlejohn's housed there. There's lots of debates today about Christian nationalism. Most of them have no idea what Christianity is or what nationalism is, right? It's a lot of ignorant chatter about that. Those three scholars are working, in many of those debates. The idea being that it's not as much like a Hill office. When I was at Heritage, the focus of Heritage was much more the day in, day out of, there's a bill coming up. How should we score it? Are we going to vote for it or against it? We need to do some market testing for polling on what the messaging should be. We're EPPC's, a step back from that of what is it that we should care about in the first place and why? And then how do we best explain that to people who aren't there yet? Or I think even more importantly, and this is what Zan and I do with the abortion book, is how do we help people who already have glimpses of the right conclusion, better understand why. Like, I actually think a lot of education is not so much persuading someone to get rid of the bad opinion they hold and to adopt a good opinion, but to take a glimpse of a truth that they hold and help them to see it more clearly and help them to see it more fully. And so that's where you'll see, I mean, what Claire Morell's doing on big tech questions, what Patrick Brown's doing on family policy questions, what we're doing with the HHS Accountability Project is, taking questions about human dignity, human flourishing, proposing what that would look like, and then on specific areas of concern, doing some of that application.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're not doing regulatory work everywhere in HHS, but on some of the big issues of abortion funding, of transgender mandates, of various aspects of, we're still living under various COVID guidelines, which is just mind blowing to think about. Responding to some of that, Aaron Cariotti has been doing great work.
As a bioethics guy, did you ever think that a worldwide pandemic would end up being a major part of your docket?
Not initially. I mean, when I first started thinking about moving to EPPC, the pandemic had not yet hit. By the time I accepted the job, I'd been working in my basement for, 8 or 9 months at that point, right? And the fact that some people are still exclusively working in their basement a year and a half after that, so if, it's been over 2 years and they haven't left the basement, is problematic. But I mean, so Aaron has a book, Aaron Cariotti, coming out next month, where he looks at the lessons of COVID for, I think the title of his book is The New Abnormal, and the subtitle is something like The Rise of the Biosecurity State, where his point is he's not going to weigh into like this piece of policy versus that piece of policy, but looking at as a whole, what is it that we're entering into when we delegate this much authority to people with white lab coats and the government, doing their bidding? And what does that then look like? What's their operating assumptions about human nature and human flourishing, and what makes for kind of essential work versus, the rest of us who laptop class, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's the interesting thing about all this is like the people that I know that, are still working in their basement so much later after all this stuff is like, yeah, I just like it better. I'm just waiting to retire, I just want to be done.
They're different. I mean, so I should clarify that. I mean, it's one thing to say that what you discovered during the pandemic was that there are actually better ways of integrating your work life with the rest of your life, right? I don't like work-life balance because it suggests that your work life isn't part of your life. But like, there are better ways of integrating family life with work life, and worse ways, right? I mean, I think for some people, exclusively working at home is a worse way of doing it because they never detach from their work, and they're always multitasking, which is to the detriment of both family life and work life. For other people, not having to commute 5 days a week, or not having to work certain hours, but having the flex time of, I'm going to get a bunch of work done from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then I'm going to play with the kids until lunchtime. And that, I think for some people, like, they learned new lessons. Like, COVID was a good kind of reset button. And so that might be why they're working in their basement. What I meant by that was the people who still think that it's unsafe to leave the basement, right? Because like COVID is, if they go to the grocery, like whatever, I think some of that is pure theater at this point. I mean, I forget the judge's name in Florida who struck down the mask mandate on the planes. Have there been any consequences?
Judge Mizell.
It was, yes. I mean, because yes. We have not seen any physical consequences to people no longer being mandated to wear masks on the airplanes. I think a lot of this was theater. The same way that, every time you have to take off your shoes if you don't have pre-check when you go through airport, it's a lot of this is theater.
Well, and here's the interesting thing about that too, is that, aside from the people who have comorbidities or whatever, most of the people who have like made this a part of their life, like basically the main thing that they care about, they're all deeply unhappy. Like they need something to like latch onto and be extremely passionate about because they're not good at anything and they're ugly.
Ryan, what should people be coming to EPPC for? I think you presented a very compelling vision for what the Institute's going to be doing. Who should seek out you guys, and for what?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for people who want to better understand the moment in which we're living in from like a grand historic sweep. Like the stuff that I think Truman's doing, Aaron Cariotti, when his book comes out next month, is going to really help people see that it's not just like, well, because the 2020 election went poorly, we're now in 2022 and there's some bad laws, bad policies, bad regulations. There's a larger historical arc that explains kind of underlying trajectories that are at play. And it's not all just John Locke either, right? I mean, I think it can also be oversimplified as like, you know, John Locke had some bad ideas, liberalism had some bad ideas, and then we get to where we are. There's a, you know, it's a multifaceted set of factors that are contributing to this. And so one is like better understanding why we are here, but then two is better understanding what we can do about it. And, you know, whether this is like, we recently put out a parent's guide to technology that Claire Morell had worked on with Patrick Brown, with Noelle Mehring, and Mary Hassan. And so Claire's in our tech project, Patrick's in our family policy project, Mary Hassan is in our kind of like transgender project, and then Noelle Mehring's in our theology of home project. And so it was like an interdepartmental product that they made because, you know, technology has a huge impact on the transgender phenomenon. How you allow your children to use technology has a huge impact on what their religious habits are going to look like. So the theology of home project. And so and then the other thing is that like Claire and Patrick's own children are still rather young, whereas Noelle's and Mary, I think all of Mary's kids are now out of the house. Noelle has some college graduates. So they come at this from a different kind of, you know, where are we in our own parenting perspective? But what they did with that guide was just put forward, you know, here are a whole host of tools that you as parents can use to better regulate the use or abuse of technology in your home. A month later, Claire partnered with Brad Wilcox, Jean Twenge, and one other author to do a memo for state policymakers on 5 things that state policymakers can do to protect kids from technology. And so like there, you know, it's a 2 different, and this is where, you know, you guys don't like the phrase little platoons, but it's a both and.
I think it's fine.
It's fine. We just like to make fun of you. You're a dork.
Thank you. I appreciate yes. Guilty as charged.
We all are.
It is. But what I like about that approach is they want to say, we don't want to wait for the states to do something. And so right now, if you are a parent, here is, you know, I think it's like a 20-page booklet that goes through different filters you can use, different devices. Like some devices are better than others in terms of what your kids can get around, et cetera, et cetera. And also like what apps should never be on your child's devices. A lot of people don't know how bad things like TikTok or Snapchat or other things can be. So that's part 1. But then part 2, state policymakers should be making the life of parents easier, not harder. Here are 5 different things that state policymakers can do to protect kids from the abuses of technology so that it goes in conjunction with what parents are trying to do. Like ideally, you would have each level of society reinforcing each other in promoting human flourishing. Right? So the family is being supported by the church, which is being supported by the state, which is being supported by the federal government in a variety of different ways, each within their own proper jurisdiction, right? I don't want the state baptizing babies, but I don't want the state making it harder for the priest to be baptizing the baby. Or in your case, whoever it is, do you guys even baptize babies?
Yeah, I do.
All right.
I'm a Presbyterian.
He's a new.
I wasn't sure what.
Yeah.
This is a new thing.
My Southern Baptist friends do not baptize babies.
Not the.
This is a whole thing.
Not the snake charming kind. The other kind. Where can people find that guide in particular? By the way, because I'm going to go find it.
Yeah, it's all on the EPPC website. If you go to eppc.org. And then for this, just go to the tech program and it'll have both the parents guide and it'll have the proposals for state policymakers. Like they're both housed there. And we're going to have a variety of other products like that, like short things on the life issues, on the tech stuff and on the family policy stuff, where we're connecting, you know, we're not doing model legislative draft language in this case, but, you know, what is the proper philosophical vision? And then what are, you know, in this case, 5 concrete policies that you can then enact.
And how can people follow everything that you are doing?
So at EPPC, you'll find all of my like long form writing for my thoughts that don't require more than, what is it now, 280 characters? Is that the new
that you can now edit, apparently.
Yeah. Oh, I've not yet done that. But on Twitter, it's at Ryan T and AND. So the first 3 letters of my last name.
Not enough characters.
No, and the most recent, so I don't know actually when this will air. So you might want to, edit this out right now. But as we're recording this, the most recent social media posts involved the cow that I got for my birthday yesterday.
Very exciting.
That we drove to Hot Springs, Virginia to pick up, and the barn that we just finished building where the cow will live with the goats and the sheep and the pigs.
Does the cow have a name?
Not yet.
Who will get to determine the name?
So I don't. So the people we bought it from, they had not named the cow because they were going to be selling it, so they didn't want to grow attached. Our dog is named Cal, C-A-L, which is named for my wife's favorite scotch, which she likes Macallan. She got a dog one, I think it was 3 years ago for her birthday. She named the dog Cal. And so our kids, at first it was a little confusing because, we'll say cow, but it's a dog. Now they're very clear. It's a dog. His name is Cal. So I was thinking we could confuse them by calling the cow dog, D-A-W-G. But then it was suggested to me that, we should just stick with the scotch, saying my favorite scotch is Lafroig. And whenever I would say Lafroig, our son would start ribbiting. He thought we were saying frog.
Yeah.
So I was like, we could just call the cow Frog.
Yes. A cow named Frog.
That's great.
That's excellent.
I got a new, 21 cubic foot chest freezer. So if you ever decide to...
Well, no, so this is very important.
I'll take
this
a quarter.
cow. This cow will have a sweet name because she's the mama cow, and we're going to be milking her. Her children, we will be eating. So we have 2 pigs.
Great.
My wife and I, we gave each other 2 pigs each. We got 4 pigs at Christmas time, and the boar, his name is Gordo. The sow's name is Bella. And then the 2 babies, one is Ginger Bacon because he's a ginger like you, but in a couple of months he will be bacon. And the other one is named Scrapple. So the animals that we will be one day consuming, we will name appropriately. So the kids know it. This animal, you're going to be friends with the animal, but a year from now, you'll be eating this animal.
He will be maple bacon.
Whereas maybe whatever we end up naming Mama Cow, maybe the kids will be named T-Bone.
Yeah. We'll set this up after the show. You're only like 30 minutes away from me, so we can...
No, we will make this happen.
We can exchange some, maybe some redacted firearm parts for, certain parts of an animal.
What I would suggest is start slow with easier to manage animals. So we started with the goats, then we got the chickens, then we got the sheep.
That's about the order that we're
pigs,
planning on doing it, yeah.
Then rabbits, then ducks, and now the cow. And so I think all that's left next would be the horse. I mean, so we keep moving in, greater size, but also not only size, because obviously like rabbits and chickens are smaller than goats, but like more labor intensive and, more disease prone, more, time consuming attention. So that's
for the time being, I'll just get the meat from you.
Well, it's funny because you could probably create all sorts of interesting rankings out of the episodes of the podcast that we've done, but without a doubt, I'm pretty sure the most consequential episode of the podcast for any of the hosts' personal lives was when we went to your home to tape.
Oh, you're gonna dox me right now.
Well, because Nick went out in the middle of nowhere and bought a house and will soon have animals.
Yeah, so I haven't gotten the chance to tell you this story, so I'll just tell our entire audience. So we came out and recorded with you, and then shortly after that was when my wife and I went down to North Carolina. We got married, and we were on our honeymoon in the Smoky Mountains in Western North Carolina. And I said, I've been thinking about like Ryan Anderson's house ever since we were there. We should do that. And also, we should talk to your parents about moving up near us. They were living in Raleigh. And so we went back and we sat down with them after our honeymoon and said, this is what we want to do. And they said, cool, let's do it. So they sold their house in Raleigh. They're currently looking for a house. But yeah, then we bought our house in West Virginia with a couple acres, and now we're looking at animals, and I'm doing housing projects. So yeah, you kind of changed my life. So for all the making fun of you, I do. You really set me on the right path there. So
well, Ryan, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule when you come into DC to tape with us, and we hope everyone will check out all the great work that you're doing. And yeah, thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed that extended cut of A Moment of Truth with Ryan. We always enjoy talking to him. It's funny, we keep on trying to schedule time to see him off camera. And so we often do at least some version of personal catching up on camera. That happens with a lot of our guests. These are just our friends that we bring to tape with us. And so we hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation. As always, go to AmericanMoment.org. There you can find everything that we're doing here at American Moment. Backlog of this podcast, well over 70 episodes at this point, hundreds of hours of content, as well as AmCanon, our coalition of books, essays, podcasts, YouTube videos, short pieces, and more on everything we believe across these issues. Sometimes I have whiplash because, we'll have this tranche of some social conservative family policy episodes. Before that, there was a bunch of foreign policy stuff. Sometimes it's immigration. We believe in lots of crazy things about everything. And so we tape podcasts about it. We're really excited for everything that we have cooking in the fall, preparing for all the change that's going to happen in Washington this year. And so we'll hope that you'll come along for the ride by following us, sign up for the mailing list, rate and review this podcast 5 stars. And thank you guys as always for listening. Moment of Truth is an American Moment Studios production filmed at the Conservative Partnership Center. Our podcast is produced and edited by Jake Mercier and Jared Cummings. Our intro music is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich. Don't forget to like and subscribe on all platforms, and you can go to AmericanMoment.org to learn more.